Welcome. What's up? Magnus is back. What you doing? How you been? And what took me so long to come back? Well, long story short, I just had videos to do. But I've never left and I'm always here. You can tweet me and my Twitter. I'll leave it right here in the description. And what's up? Now, today's video that you can see in the title is regarding emulation and ROMs. Now, emulation specifically when it comes to like even downloading ROMs themselves, which you shouldn't do because it's illegal, it's got such a weird stigma in the video game industry because having ROMs themselves and owning those ROMs is okay if you actually own the licensed version of that game. So you have the game, you have the Blu-ray or cartridge or DVD, you figure out a way on how to back up that file and then you play it on an emulator. It's actually been taken to court. That's perfectly legal. You can play that software in any place that you want because you do have the license to use that software. Now, games themselves are designed to work with specific pieces of hardware that a certain manufacturer, such as Sony, such as Nintendo, such as Microsoft, they design hardware so that you can play the software that is licensed to you. Now with that, these console manufacturers have the ability to charge a fee for game developers to be able to release software on their consoles. Now, when it comes to those consoles, especially over the years, they've changed and been upgraded many times, but those games still hold a certain point of value. They still have value. And that's why, especially that nostalgic factor, and that's why you see at least modern consoles and even PC has taken advantage of being able to sometimes download old games that are just being emulated into modern consoles, and then you can play them and relive kind of memories of the past. Now that's all fair and dandy because now we can actually explore those games from the past, but there's still a problem. You see, recently it's been talked about that old games from yesteryear are starting to be lost because there's literally hundreds of thousands of games potentially, or at least thousands of games that really never make it onto those, like a Microsoft store, or Nintendo shop, or PlayStation store to be resold, emulated, and played again. And then you basically have these gems, potential gems that are lost forever until these console makers feel like, you know what, let's actually throw them a bone. And then of course they'd have to work licensing and all that other stuff to be able to sell it. And that's unfortunate because all of these games then start to be lost and we need to preserve them. So emulation in itself, and actually websites that do host ROMs, even though they technically legally shouldn't, in a historical sense, they are preserving some of the software that could have been lost forever. Now that's great, but there's a problem. Because it's not legal to do that, you're still having this weird situation. But there's where I come up with an idea that is not perfect, but it's an idea. You see, console makers, and of course developers like Konami, like Sega, like Nintendo is a developer too, but all these other developers, Activision, they have this software and the licenses to host this software and to sell the software. And yeah, they'll repackage it a few times and then sell it to you again on each console. And then they make a buck doing that. But is that the most efficient and cost-effective way of earning that money? And they can't repackage so many pieces of software that they've developed over the years. So here's my idea. Now bear with me on this one because it does have flaws, but it's a potential revenue stream for not only developers but console makers themselves. And it brings emulation into the light where it's not looked at so negatively. So, imagine this. A storefront or multiple storefronts that are permitted to host ROMs. And these are all the ROMs, the ISOs for the DVDs and the Blu-ray versions of these games. These ROMs get hosted where each sale of these ROMs, you still pay a licensing fees to the developers. Whether it's Sega, whether it's Konami, whether it's Capcom, but it just hosts the ROM files themselves so that you could download them and then play them on whatever emulator that you want. And in some cases, such as like, for example, I have the EverDrive here that actually works on an authentic Sega Genesis console. you can download those ROMs, put the SD card on an actual, like one of these, for example, and then play the game on actual hardware if a person has that hardware. But this is just one of many methods of how you can actually use a ROM to your advantage and be able to play it on whatever you want. But here's the thing. When it comes to repackaging and reselling all these different collections of old games, the developers have to put in the work to do that. Whereas if they're just selling the ROMs, then they can actually host a store, like just a ROM store, one that everyone trusts, and maybe you can have it being a collective effort between developers and console makers, where everyone gets a little bit piece of the pie for these sales of the ROMs. And each ROM can cost, from $1 to $2, because there's no guarantee they're going to work with every emulator. So keep it very cheap and just host them. And have like a legacy program, so it's not like, maybe it's the newest that can be hosted is like 2 generations back. And then you just have that excitement for people to be able to legally own ROMs and buy the licenses for these games, because they only get the license when they buy the game. But if the game is no longer attainable, how can you actually legally own the right to play that game anymore? It doesn't make sense. And then having to find these games out there in the wild is difficult. So then you almost end up illegally downloading it anyway if you do want to play it. Well, why not monetize it? Because let's be honest, a lot of people are already doing that anyway. A lot of people are getting these ROMs through illegal methods. And if you want to have a comparison, let's look at what was happening to the music industry back in the early 2000s, when Napster was a thing, when LimeWire was a thing, where people were sharing music that they were downloading or converting to MP3s, and it was causing a storm in the music industry, where they needed a solution because getting all of these songs was too easy. Then Apple came into the game with their own store, with basically a place where you could download these tracks for $1, and then they were legally letting people own the license to those songs so that they can play it whenever they want on their own hardware. And that's what the video game industry needs to do. Something similar. Something where you could download these old games, pay a small fee, but then play them on custom emulators. Play them on, like I said, the EverDrive that I have. Play them on however they want, without it requiring additional work from the actual makers. Because you won't really need to do extra work if you're just giving them the ROM. But now, there's a little bit of a challenge. The challenge is a lot of the licenses to sell a lot of these games have run out. For example, if you're looking at a game from the 90s, an Avengers game that, let's say, was developed by Capcom, but let's say Capcom no longer holds the license to the Avengers. It just expired. So can they actually collect on that? Because the license expired, they're no longer able to sell that software, and it kind of gets lost in a legal type of situation. Well, when it comes to those type of games and those type of loopholes, perhaps something new can be worked out so that they can do that and have both parties, whether it's Disney, whether it's Capcom, kind of work something out. And if they don't get that ironed out, then they don't sell that. But there's a lot of software that doesn't require or doesn't have those license restrictions. So leave those out. Put out the software that doesn't have those license restrictions. And then eventually you could work out or negotiate something that works out for those titles that do have those license restrictions. And then they can somehow monetize that, because the effort is little to none besides developing that store. But then the final thing comes out is like, what about the fact that they want to make sure that you're not buying the ROMs and then just giving it to everybody else? That, I mean, you could implement some sort of software protection for those files that you download to keep it that it's only yours, such as making an account that is exclusively for your account that's signed into this like online store that gets all these ROMs. And then, of course, when you use it on an emulator, you have to be signed into that account for the ROM to work. You could do that, or sign into the account for the ROM to work and then build it in the ROM, or build it through an online portal, something that does that. Although, again, that requires a little bit of work. I'm of the proponent of, don't do that. Just sell them the license, and then they hold the license like an NFT, right? And then They're able to play it on whatever device that they want. And having that license gives them the right to always be able to play that game. Now, yes, then it starts to question, well, what's to stop them from sharing it or whatever, you know? Well, nothing. But what's stopping them now? And I think a lot of people would feel better knowing that they actually legitimately have the license to play a lot of these games. I know that I would. I would actually spend the money on games that I really want to own again. Even though I own a lot of them, now I have a digital license to own that game and play it on whatever emulator. That's got to happen in the industry, because honestly, there's a lot of games that are getting lost forever. And this is a strategy that can not only make money, but take it to the next level. And if you see it actually happening in the future, I'm letting you know now that, hey, I came up with the idea. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you have any thoughts about that idea, or the ability to actually own ROMs and buy ROMs to use on your emulators? That's completely 100% legal. Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.